All right, welcome everyone. To those of you who are on live with us this evening from coast to coast and in countries around the world, we're thrilled that you could be with us at this complimentary webinar with Michael Conforti and Rick Tarnas, as they're going to be speaking about the gods among us, archetypal patterning and archetypal cosmology for the 21st century. What you're going to be participating in and joining us for this evening is a conversation that we are offering as a way of, I guess, offering a bit of an appetizer to all of you this evening for a wonderful banquet that is going to be presented this summer, July 22nd through the 27th at Eranos in Switzerland. And Rick and Michael will be sharing from their life's work and scholarship during that week. And so we thought it would be wonderful to have this conversation to introduce all of you to some of the themes and the topics that they're going to be covering and that they're going to be diving into in the beautiful, inspirational, and as most of you I'm sure all know, historical setting at Eranos. I do want to make some formal introductions tonight. And then I'm going to turn it over to Michael and Rick. We're going to be asking them some questions and getting their responses. But I want to say thank you and recognize someone who is behind the scenes this evening, but very much a part of the team that is responsible, really one of the main people responsible for bringing this Eranos event together. Tony Dianca, who's on with us this evening, is a specialized project and event planner and producer with over 30 years of project planning expertise, focused primarily in the fields of Jungian psychology, depth psychology, and the arts. And Tony is, I guess, the Wonder Woman, you could say, Tony. I know you're not going to like that description necessarily, but she really is in terms of the person who's responsible for pulling together all of the details and really making this event happen. So, Tony, we're thrilled that you are with us this evening. With that being said, let me introduce you to the two people you're going to be listening to and engaging with this evening. Many of you, I'm sure, know them both and know their work, which is substantial. Richard Tarnas. Rick is the founding director of the graduate program in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness at the California Institute of Integral Studies. He teaches courses in the history of ideas, archetypal studies, depth psychology, and religious evolution. He frequently lectures on archetypal studies and depth psychology at Pacifica Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara, as well as here at the Assisi Institute, and he was formerly the Director of Programs and Education at Esalen Institute in Big Sur. He's the author of The Passion of the Western Mind, A History of the Western World, and his second book, Cosmos and Psyche, Intimations of a New World View, recently received the Book of the Year Prize from the Scientific and Medical Network, and it's the basis for an upcoming documentary film called Changing of the Gods. Rick is a past president of the International Transpersonal Association and has served on the Board of Governors for the C.G. Jung Institute of San Francisco. And for those of you who have the privilege of knowing Rick personally, having worked with him, studied with him, you know he is a genuine scholar, and the work that he's going to be sharing tonight is his life's work. So Rick, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here with you.
And the other person I'm happy to introduce all of you to, many of you I'm sure know him and know his work as well. Michael Conforti is a Jungian analyst and the founder and director of the Assisi Institute. He's been a faculty member at the C.G. Jung Institute in Boston, the Jung Foundation of New York, and for many years served as a senior associate faculty member in the doctoral and master's programs in clinical psychology at Antioch. Michael is a pioneer in the field of matter-psyche studies, and his scholarship on the workings of archetypal fields and the relationship between Jungian psychology and the new sciences is internationally recognized. He continues to present his work to a growing national and international audience, including the Jung Institute in Zurich and Jungian organizations in Russia, Colombia, Australia, Venezuela, Denmark, Italy, and Canada. He's the author of Threshold Experiences, The Archetype of Beginnings, and Field, Form, and Fate, Patterns in Mind, Nature, and Psyche. He has a private practice here in Mystic, Connecticut, and continues to consult with individuals and corporations around the world. So he also happens to be someone whom I know and think fairly highly of, in fact, very highly of. As I said yes to him many years ago, Michael and I, of course, our husband and wife. My name is Laura Lee Scott Conforti. I am the executive director of the Institute, the founder and director of Seeing Red, and I am very excited for the conversation that's happening tonight. So welcome to all of you. Michael, thank you for being with us.
It's my pleasure.
So with this being said, let's start. We have some unbelievable questions. So let's start with our first question this evening, and this is for both of you to respond to. What is it about Jung's work that makes it so vital today, so many years after his death? I will repeat that one more time. What is it about Jung's work that makes it so vital today, so many years after his death?
Rick, you want to begin?
Okay, happy to. How's my volume there, Laura Lee?
You're great. You're great.
Great. Okay, so Jung really came back from his deep inner journey there in the 1913 to 1920 period with kind of some treasures for the modern psyche. In a way, he did a kind of classic underworld descent and brought back some gifts, and among those gifts was an expanded understanding of the psyche that was much deeper than before. We were able to get a sense of the archetypal psyche, of these powerful universal principles or patterns or beings, really, that inform our psyche. And he also helped many of us recognize that if you're studying psychology, you're not just studying kind of neutralized, appetites and motivations and instincts. You're also studying something that has a meaning, that has purpose, that has a spiritual and moral evolution that is central to the human being, and that we can't understand human psychology or psychopathology and our symptoms, let alone our health, without grasping this psycho-spiritual dimension of the psyche. And then if I can just add one last kind of gift in terms of this overall enlarged view of psychology and of human experience that Jung bestowed us, he grasped that we're each involved in a kind of narrative unfolding, that our lives are a quest. And not only that quest is embedded in a larger historical quest that's collective, that we're all participating in. And in a number of his books, he looked at that larger collective historical dimension of the psyche and of our time. And I think in our era, the 21st century, that bringing that kind of insight and self-awareness to the collective, to the historical, is absolutely crucial. So, Michael, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
I think of the early navigators and pioneers around the world, and they had a certain map, pretty limited, a map of the new world, a map of the jungle, a map of whatever, where to find gold, where to find the animals, where to find the treasure. But I think they also knew the map was just some approximation of a much bigger world. And they began their journey. I mean, I can't imagine. We go out on a boat right now, you have GPS system, you got fish finders, you got radar, you got espresso machines, you got everything on a boat today to get you where you want to go. And some of these boats, like those ocean liners, are 14 stories high, But you think about the pioneers, and they went out, and Heshu talks about it beautifully when he says, the explorers don't go out because they want to, they needed to. They knew there was something bigger. And for me, and a lot of the people I respect, and I know you're one of them, Rick, that the people that seem to love this work know that there's always some bigger domain around the corners, some other part of the continent we haven't explored, some major fishing ground, some people. I mean, how interested are we when we hear there's a lost tribe? They found pictures of a lost tribe. Oh my God, let me find the pictures. You know, it's because it's that sense of wonder. And I know Laura Lee speaks a lot about Heschel's work, who I also love, and he talks about it. Yeah, I prayed for wonder, and they had it. They had that wonder, and they had the guts. They had the guts and the fortitude, and families behind them that said, you know, we love you. Go, take your journey for a year, 2 years. And they didn't know where exactly they were going. They never knew that they were going to come back. And when we look at Jung's work, when he wrote the Red Book, I mean, how much of that book says, I didn't want to do this. This wasn't, you know, I didn't buy a ticket for this thing. I was compelled to do it. And I have had experiences in this journey into the unconscious that one would never really want to have. It was a pioneering spirit, and that's one. And I think that we've lost a lot of that today. I mean, you know, psychology, and many of the human relations field in particular, more so than the sciences, in my opinion. The sciences are still more open, a lot of ways. Everyone's got a shadow, but I think they tend to be more open to new discoveries. However, psychology and many human relations field, you know, we got it down. We know what drives things. We know it's all about mothers and fathers and early traumas, and we know what to do with traumas, or so we think. And I remember writing a piece a couple of years ago about trauma. I said, you know, when we really begin to embark on working with trauma in our own lives and our clients or our friends and our families, we're hitting a land that's beyond the domain of psychology, because of things we don't know. We don't really know the domain of trauma. So for me, literally, the answer is, or one response is, it allows us to have that wonder again and to realize there's a bigger world. That's number one. The other thing, why today? Well, for years we had the church, you know, whether the synagogues or the Catholic churches or the temples or whatever. A lot of the religious systems are not holding anymore. With the absence of religious structures, we often lose a sense of inner morality. And remember, it was Jung, through his discussion with Freud on morality, that he came to understand that morality was an innate ontological feature of the human psyche. You know, Freud said morality was passed on by the tribal fathers and the great mothers of the tribe. He said, well, who gave it to them? You know, and that's when he said it was innate. So I think it hits a lot of these needs in us. And especially, I mean, we're at another one of these crisis points in history. I don't know, I'd love to hear your perspective on this, Rick. I know you do a lot of wonderful work on the global and the astrological time that we're in. From a psychological point of view, an archetypal point of view, we're at a really rough time. And it was Einstein. You know, Einstein said, you know, it's not that our answers are wrong, but our questions aren't big enough. And I think Jung's approach answers a lot bigger questions about, you know, what really shapes our life? What's shaping the government the way it is? What shapes our responses? What shapes the civilization we have? Nuclear war, we can push a button and destroy millions of people. And there's something about that, a lot of somethings about that I think we need to try to understand. And Jung's psychology is one of the most open approaches to psyche in the universe I've ever seen in a psychological domain. And I've been in this field almost 40 years now. That's what makes it brilliant. I think that's part of what the collective hunger is in people right now, why it's taking. And thank God we got people like George Lucas that brought it to the film industry with Campbell and all. I mean, so we're seeing the impact in so many ways. But those are my two pieces. One, navigation to a bigger domain that we need, and we didn't map all this out. And the other is our systems, social systems, religious systems, they're not holding the way they did. And again, Jung said, look, the ultimate arbiter of truth is inside. And I think many people then begin the inner journey to find something. And that's deeply meaningful and compelling.
Well, thank you, Michael and Rick, for both of those. And I think as I was listening to both of you, what I was struck with, you know, not only the similarity in your work relative to the archetypal, but with both of you from my perspective, both of you bring that sense of something greater, of a mission and a destiny, and that you're each pursuing something greater. And I found that quote, Michael, from Heschel. I'd love to share it with the group, because I think that's what Heschel is talking about. He says this: what the sense of the ineffable perceives is something objective, which cannot be conceived by the mind nor captured by imagination or feeling. Subjective is the absence, not the presence, of radical amazement. Such lack or absence is a sign of a half-hearted, listless mind, of an undeveloped sense for the depth of things. And both of you, I think, in your life's work have brought that sense that he's talking about here for the depth of things. And that's what you're both really bringing out relative to Jung and his brilliance in the work. So I'd like to move on. We have a lot of questions this evening, and they're fantastic questions. I hope we can get through all of them.
Well, can I just add one line more to that in terms of the interest? I mean, on this call tonight, we have over 300 people from around the world. We just got a call from somebody from Zimbabwe wanting to be part of this. We could have had 500, 600, 700 people on this call tonight. I mean, that's another indication that Rick's work, and hopefully some of Z's work, but the work of Jung and looking at the psyche and the collective unconscious is still really, really compelling and important.
Yeah, no, you're right. And not only really compelling, but I think living in a culture that is so politicized, where everything is being put into political terms. Jung's work, your work, Rick's work, the work of many people who are joining this call, who are analysts, therapists, and involved in this work, it's because they want to go deeper. They recognize there has to be something more. So here's the second question. And Rick, if you want to respond to this first, and then Michael from there, and this is a little more of a personal question. Was there an experience or experiences that made Jung's work so vital for your life and scholarship? Was there an experience that made Jung's work so vital for your life and scholarship?
That's a good question to ask myself. As I look back on my biography, I feel Jung coming in stages. The first stage, coming out of high school, where I learned about archetypes through basically the Jesuits taught me about Plato and Aristotle, where the understanding of archetypes, that term archetype, comes from the Platonic tradition. And so I had that in the back of my mind in a more metaphysical way. And then as I was at university, I started, I read Memories, Dreams, Reflections, but I also read a book of Jung's where he had collected four archetypes together into one volume and explored them in depth. And I felt that this perspective provided me with a kind of a tool, a lens through which I could understand both my own experience, but also my experience of the arts, both my biographical experience, but also like reading Tolstoy or Dostoevsky or Shakespeare. These are archetypal characters. I mean, that's what makes great art. Or Bergman's films. The artist is a vessel of these archetypes, and once one gets a grasp of the archetypal perspective, it's invaluable for understanding the arts, because the arts are this kind of a direct conduit to the archetypal domain, which is more well, it's mythic. It's got numinosity. It has a kind of ennobling grandeur that even in our suffering, our human suffering as finite mortals, we were elevated by that. Maybe I'll just give headlines for the other two stages that come up to my mind as you with this question. And the next stage was really through as part of the kind of psychedelic revolution there at Harvard in the 1960s, and then coming out to Esalen in Big Sur, California, where I was for many years and studied with Stanislav Grof and Gregory Bateson and others who were part of that kind of psychedelic awakening within psychology and the sciences. consciousness studies. And it was quite clear that Jung had a lot to say about that level of experience. And then I'll just say the last stage came when I started grasping the kind of revelation of the astrological perspective, and to see that the great principles that astrology is based on are they're Jungian archetypes, very clearly, which Jung himself recognized, and why he was so drawn to astrology. So it's that kind of sequence of stages where Jung just became more and more central to my way of understanding not only my own life, but understanding life itself, and the psyche.
Rick,
So I'm all ears for Michael.
Thank you. And Rick, listening to you, I didn't think about it in time, or I would have asked both you and Michael to share as we're going back here to your origins. I mean, in addition to you sharing a real calling and a sensitivity for the depth of things, like Michael, I've seen some of Michael's pictures from those days. His hair was a little bit longer than it is now. If I had thought of it in time, I would have asked you both to share your photos from going back in those days.
Maybe we'll bring them to Eranos.
There you go. Okay. To Eranos. Thank you. Michael.
Right. If I could give a bit of a triptych to get to your question, there are like three big things. They all led to the big realization about there's something powerful about Jung. And not that the experiences made a direct equation, but they were I would say, the stones that built this. One, I grew up in a big Italian family in Brooklyn. And my grandparents, the ones I was really close to, they were from Sicily, Palermo, Sicily, and Reggio Calabria. And we'd spend a lot of time with the family there, going to their grandparents' home, eating. And it was always 10, 20 to 40 different cousins and uncles together. And I was enthralled by the language since I was a kid. And I had a strange ear for the difference between the dialects. And when I would hear this, it was almost all Sicilian spoken growing up. It's a very old language with a very guttural sound. And I always had this sense, again, not intellectual, not I knew what it meant, that's not the point, but I had a sense that this is a different world that a lot of people didn't live in. And I remember, going to fast forward in that story, when I began the Jung Institute back in 1979, Dr. Kaufman was one of the first teachers we had, turned to be my mentor for 30 years. He asked the class, when was your first experience of the self? And everyone was, oh my God, oh my gosh. Oh, okay, Michael, what is it? I said, being at my grandparents' home. Well, what was it? I said, I just had a sense, some felt sense that there was another world there, a very different, a very old world with old traditions. And we grew up in a way, I mean, I think of it today, I grew up in a very old world way. And they say people that come over as immigrants, they keep the culture, they keep the values, they keep the neighborhood, they keep the traditions really strong. So that was number one. The second major thing was, I went to City University in New York. And when I took personality theory, the teacher was interesting. I was really waiting for the abnormal psych course. That's what I loved, abnormal psychology. And the teacher just mentioned, he was giving, the 1 hour on Jung, maybe half an hour on Jung before he moved on to more important theories. It's kind of the way it was in class. He used the words anima and alchemy. And Rick, it was so strange. I never heard those words in my life. I caught fire. And I've been like that in a lot of my life. Words have a way of resonating because in part, the thinking had been my inferior function. And it hit that inferior, and it opened up a world, like walls came down and vistas opened up. I said, I don't know what the hell it means, but there's something in there. I want to find out what that is. The third piece, which is the sort of the crowning piece of this, is I did work at Willowbrook State School in New York. And if you remember back in the 70s and 80s, Geraldo Rivera, when he was still a young reporter, he did this huge expose on his school for developmentally delayed and retarded kids in New York. And it was called Willowbrook. And I did an internship there one semester. And oh my God, if you ever imagined deplorable conditions, he was not exaggerating. Okay, I'll just leave it at that. Anyway, you're there and you're seeing the worst of what these kids live with, and and they're never getting out. They're never getting out. 40-year-old kids that look like 3-year-olds with diapers and whatever. Anyway, every day they had recess. And this is a story that really touched me really deep. I think led me to the power of Jung, okay? That's why I'm saying this. These kids would kind of walk out on the wheelchair or crawl out, and this one little kid who spent the day, you know, like davening, right? But he wasn't davening. He was just, I guess you say, totally autistic, looking at in a corner, looking at the wall the whole day like this. He ran out when that bell went off for recess. And then everyone went outside. This was a nice summertime, right? And he ran to the flower garden every day. And he did the same thing every day during the summer. He went to the garden, he picked flowers, and he made it into a crown and put it on his head. I said, and he was different. For that half an hour, he was a different person. And I said, oh my God, I don't know what's happening, but something about this act has transformed this kid, even temporarily. That arrow went really pretty deep. That was a Cupid's arrow in a different way, and I never forgot it. And that's, I think, the piece that really sensitized me with those other grandparents and the culture and the food and the dialects and all, to that there's something about immersion into another domain, another world, another realm that is transformative. Again, I didn't have the words. Don't just say I had the words back then. I didn't. I was 18, 17, whatever I was, 18 years old. But I did know that something powerful really happened, and I'd like to know something, a little bit about what the heck happened.
Well, thank you. Thank you, both of you. And you know, it's just striking how in both your stories of what drew you to this, again, that very early on, that sense for the depth of things, that awareness, that intuitive sensitivity and awareness of something greater, and an incredible intellectual curiosity that fueled each of your journeys. And it's interesting listening to both of you that, Michael, where you took this work is, you know, to the new sciences, Rick's into the arts, and yet you both, it's so complementary what you've done with it. So let's move right in.
It does really capture our different typologies and how we've been led to a very similar place.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So let's go to this next question. It's directed to both of you. Rick, if you want to start first, and this question is, how does the archetypal perspective that emerges out of the Jungian tradition differ from the standard psychoanalytic approach to understanding the unconscious? So I'll repeat that one more time. So how does the archetypal perspective, which of course is what both of your work is rooted in, what you will be presenting more of at Eranos, how does that archetypal perspective differ from the standard psychoanalytical approach when it comes to understanding the unconscious?
Well, that is a comparison or a contrast between basically Freud and the tradition that evolved out of Freud or since Freud without Jung, and then Jung himself, who is in one sense very much part of the tradition that Freud initiated in depth psychology, but in other ways he transcended that tradition very early on, and in some sense, you know, even back in the first decade of the 20th century, when Jung and Freud both went to the United States for a visit, 1909, and they met William James, who by then was just in the last couple of years of his life. And James was quite, William James, as you know, wrote The Varieties of Religious Experience, and he had a very sensitive feeling for the importance of the spiritual and religious and transpersonal dimension of the psyche. And in that sense, he too is a kind of co-founder of depth psychology, where there's a depth dimension to the psyche, along with Freud and Jung. And he recognized that Jung was carrying that more religious sensitivity than Freud was. Now, I would say the big difference is this. Jung, first of all, sees the unconscious as being it has its own wisdom in its depths, and there's a healing intelligence at work within the human psyche that also works of its own accord within a therapeutic relationship, for example, bigger than the therapist and bigger than the issues like diagnosing the transference and countertransference and things like that. Bigger than that is an impulse that both the therapist and the patient or client are involved in that will transform both. And in each of us individually, in the unfolding of our lives, the unconscious is not only the source of our, say, artistic inspiration or new ideas if we're a scientist or a inventor or something like that, but the unconscious, and that of course is why dreams are often the way people get these insights, these sudden breakthroughs. But in addition, we are all being moved, Jung felt, towards wholeness and the great archetypal powers that are at work within the psyche, and our own kind of intrinsic journey that is moving us, whether we want to or not, moving us towards larger horizons and a deeper sense of self in a deeper world. That sensibility is very strong in Jung, and both of them share a sense of, let's say, the power of the complex. Freud actually took Jung's word complex, coming from his Jung's early association experiments, he used it to describe the Oedipus complex, for example. But for Freud, these were basically biological instincts, including the Oedipus complex, that are problematically driving the human being, and that the human being is kind of locked in an eternal battle with these instincts while trying to maintain a civilized structure. And that creates a lot of misery, which he felt was in some sense the intrinsic human condition. Jung had a greater sense of these complexes as ultimately informed by archetypal principles that were that had a numinosity to them, and that had a spiritual meaning, and that had a potential for transformational healing, and that we want to have that relationship to the unconscious. It's not just something that we're trying to conquer, which was a little bit more Freud's conquistador mentality. Something that we need to navigate, to learn from, to be transformed by, to serve, while keeping our agency, while keeping our critical consciousness in a kind of dance, a kind of sacred marriage, as it were, between our human consciousness and these powerful forces. So I think those are some of the major differences that I see between the Jungian perspective and the standard psychoanalytic perspective, keeping in mind that actually contemporary psychoanalysis has more and more integrated many of Jung's insights, including about the transference, by the way, which Jung had a lot of insight into, in many ways more strongly than the mainstream psychoanalytic tradition. So that, in a number of ways, we see psychoanalysis moving towards a kind of integration of that which it divorced itself from with the early separation of Freud and Jung.
Rick, thank you. And I love what you said when this comment that you made relative to that the Jung saw the unconscious not as something to be conquered. And I think perhaps neuropsychology has something to do with the psychoanalytic moving a little bit closer. Michael, it'd be interesting to hear from you because you've studied both Freud and Jung, so you bring both those worlds together. relative
Well,
to the question.
yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, it's a great answer. Like, I'd love to just listen to that for an hour. The way you frame it is really important. I'd begin with that question by putting on one side of the continuum transference and mechanistic thought. The other side, you have archetypal and cycloidal, to begin to capture what I think are the differences between them. Now, I have been trained in both. I'm classically trained in Jungian analysis and privately trained in Freudian with Robert Langs for 20 years. So I've been seeped in both worlds for a long time. And, unlike a lot of people, I don't just put down psychoanalysis. Freud carried the torch for so long, but, as did all the greats. One of the things that Jung commented on about Freud is that Freud didn't really understand mythology and religion and spirituality. And a great example, you actually began with this, right, about Oedipus. And we talked about it this weekend. We just finished a dream conference. And it's the Oedipus story that is a big part of the difference when you go mechanistic transfer and cycloidal archetypal. And I want to also publicly acknowledge the work of a Jungian analyst named Richard Nicoletti up in Connecticut, up in New Hampshire, who really helped me understand a lot more about the Oedipus complex. When we think of Freud Oedipus complex, we think of, well, the kid slept with his mother and had kids with her and killed the father, and bad day, a lot of tequila that night, and then and then we look at people and say, I guess you want to sleep with your mother, and I guess you really want to kill the father. Well, and again, I really want to acknowledge Richard Nicoletti, who did part of his dissertation at the Jung Institute in Boston on this. So Richard, if you're hearing it, congratulations for that work. He told the story, which I didn't know, Rick. He said, do you know the backdrop to the story of Oedipus? I said, I'm ashamed to say I don't. And he said, before Oedipus was even a thought in the parents' mind, the parents were married and whatever, the Oedipus's father-to-be was asked by the king at the time to help initiate the king's son. And he said, it'd be my pleasure. It'd be my pleasure to do it. And he took on the task. And he would teach the young man the ways of so-called manhood, hunting and riding chariots and all the things you do to become a man in the culture. Well, the man that was to be Oedipus's father turned out to be a pedophile and sexually molested the king's son. Sky, you didn't know that either. I see your reactions. Yeah, I didn't either. And anyway, the boy eventually, after he was accosted numerous times by the man, killed himself. And the king said to the Oedipus father-to-be, I forget his name right now, I'm sorry. He said, look, I could have you killed right now. I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to do something worse to you. I'm going to curse you. I'm going to give you a curse. And the curse is your son will kill you. And your son will sleep with your wife and have children with her. What greater torture can there be for a father? The proverbial line in the Bible, what is it? The sins of the father? Well, the whole story about Oedipus is not sleep with the mother and killing the father. It's living out the sins of the father. And now we go to the cycloidal, the way I would frame it, the archetypal. Oedipus was caught in the spell and the archetype of the father's transgressions. And his life was really an epigenetic enactment of the father's world. He never separated. So I bring that story up as I think a wonderful way of looking at the difference between, well, you want to sleep with your mother. My analyst pulled that on me many times. And I had to say, he fought me. Rick, my analyst fought me for 3 months. He said, you want to sleep with your mother? I said, no. And this is my Jungian analyst. No. And after about 4 months, I said, no, it's not my mother. It's my aunt I had interest in. She was the beautiful, sexy one growing up. It wasn't my mother. My aunt was the sexy one. But anyway, Jung understood the much broader. He understood the deeper, whether sexuality. He said, come on, you really going to tell me life is driven by the desire for copulation? Come on. And he understood that, yes, on the ultraviolet, infrared, we talked about instinct and archetype. On one level, yes, desire, satiation, copulation, orgasm, all that on one end, drives, mechanism. But he knew on the other end, what drove even the physical in many ways was the archetypal need for conjunctio. And that's the brilliance. And I think you said it beautifully, Rick, in terms of the expansiveness of the Jungian view. So I think both these examples of the backdrop of the Oedipus story, as well as even what drives a sexual thing, and the difference between Freud and Jung, I think captures it for me as a clinician and as a theorist also, the major differences here between them. And that, and always trying to put Freud down. And the last thing I say is I think another way to capture this is when you move from Freud to Jung, you move from pathology to expression. Freudian psychology and many, many psychological approaches are really looking at pathology. The Jungian is looking at the symbolic of what it means. I mean, is you really sick that you want to do X and Y? Is an addiction just because you're sick? Whatever version of addiction you may have, whatever so-called perversion. And one of the great teachers I had in New York was Edward Christopher Whitmont, who did a series of lectures on so-called perversions. And he said, do you guys know, you men and women in the class know, that every so-called sexual perversion was at one time or another in history a sacred ritual? Dude, really? So aside from giving us all permission to be more free in our life and expression, all that, you really began to understand that this deeper thing was moving through us. And we didn't know what the hell it was. But it was archetypal and really, as you were saying, Rick, it's forward moving. When you understand, not to give free rein to that, it's not the point, but to then go back and say, I wonder what the archetype is that's driving this particular behavior or inclination. That's, I think, a lot of the stuff that really captures the beauty of a Jungian analytic approach in distinction to the Freudian.
Could I just add, Michael, that was excellent. And you bring up right from the start a really important point about the importance of not kind of in a one-sided way negating Freud and in order to elevate Jung. Freud has a genuine, I think, heroism in his life. He was a pioneer in his own way, and for many reasons, the cultural situation he was in there in Vienna, his particular life experience, the kinds of patients that he was seeing. There was just a lot that drove him more towards what I would call more like the rationalist Enlightenment side of the modern mind, while Jung, with his background, his patience, his spontaneous, deep and often disturbing experiences, he had to grapple with something that was on a different order. And so each one has his own gift that he's bringing. And in some sense, Freud, I had a professor at Harvard who said Freud brought the spear of understanding the importance of the instincts, as that's the spear that broke through the veil of the unconscious and opened that up. But then Jung walked through that opened up veil and saw the deep archetypal, the great expanse of the archetypal cosmos basically open up to him. That together, I think they represent an important synthesis of the biological and the archetypal spiritual, and we need both. And the divorce that happened between Freud and Jung is something that the analytical tradition is still healing from.
Yeah.
Neither Freud nor Jung entirely got over their separation emotionally. They were so important to each other. And I think a lot of people have been carrying on that movement towards a larger integration of the Freudian and Jungian gifts since they died. And I think we'll probably be pursuing some of that ourselves at Eranos.
Yeah.
Michael and Rick, thank you both. And I'm watching the clock. I mean, these answers in this conversation is amazing. And think about how wonderful it will be to sit at Eranos looking out over the lake and not having to be watching the clock at home, and be able to engage more deeply. I'm struck by what you both are saying relative to Freud and Jung, and this divorce and the split that I'm sure most everyone who's on our call tonight is aware of. But what is really coming through for me is, again, this dichotomy of the scientific and the rational versus, I don't even want to use the word mystical, but creative, irrational. I mean, I think that there is where we're moving to and where we need to move towards, and I think there's hope that we are, is a deeper integration of those two, as evidenced tonight in this conversation with each of your respective works and the you know, where you both have gone with those, is that this coming together of the scientific and the artistic, and recognizing that both are a necessity and needed, bringing that together. And we don't have time to go more deeply into that. I want to go to this next question. And Rick, this one is directed for you, but again, feel free, Michael, to respond as well. The question is this: given the power of archetypes in the human psyche, what can you say about the issue of free will and determinism? Just a little question. We're not going to cover. Let me repeat that. So, are we puppets of the archetypes? Are we archetypally possessed? Can we simply consciously choose? I'll take that one. I'm going to dial up Hestia. I'm going to dial up. But Rick, if you can speak to this issue of free will and determinism within the container of the archetypal.
Yes, important question, because when we encounter the power of the archetypes and archetypal complexes in our own psyche, or we watch them at work in history, when a whole nation can be possessed by an archetypal complex and driving it hither and thither, one cannot but be impressed by the sheer kind of deterministic potency, the power of the archetype in shaping our consciousness and our behavior. We are so easily swept up into into the power of them. And the other side of that, though, is that part of the whole modern evolution of the self has been one of empowering the self's autonomy, our capacity to choose, to be masters of our fate, to be able to move forward on the project of our life that we determine for ourselves. And I think there is I think often the Europeans, like Freud and Jung, had a deeper sense of the power of forces beyond them, because they lived through the two world wars in a way that and the power of mass movements that such as fascism and communism sweeping over countries on their continent in ways that left them with a kind of chastened sense of modern autonomy and agency. At the same time, Jung, who had such a strong sense of that and the power of the unconscious, he said there was still every human individual has this capacity to this kind of Promethean gift of our capacity to be free, to exercise our free will in relationship to these powerful forces. Not that we can choose which one we're going to which one's we're going to have to deal with. Not at all. We find these emerge with spontaneous force from the collective field as well as from in our depths, and it's where our symptoms come from. It's where our collective suffering comes from, as well as the positive. And so the way I have come to understand this paradox of how we are simultaneously powerfully driven by the archetypes and pervaded by them, and at the same time to not lose a sense of this painstakingly forged autonomy in our, where we do have a sense like I can choose whether I am going to live this way or that way. Within the same archetypal field, there are multivalent possibilities. There are higher, more noble dimensions, ways of expressing and acting that archetype. And then there are less noble or less morally admirable, more trivial ways in which that same archetypal energy can be expressed. And I mean, you can have the warrior can manifest as a Gandhi, you know, a Harriet Tubman, a Martin Luther King can be carrying the warrior archetype in a very noble way, or it can be played out in a much more trivial or destructive or narcissistic way, and destructive way. And so it is intrinsic to the archetypes that they are multivalent. They have a range. There's like a rainbow spectrum of ways in which they can express themselves, and it's up to it. Human, our moral obligation is to become more conscious of what archetypal forces are at work inside us, so that we are able to not simply be unconscious puppets of them, but we can express them, dance with them, intelligently, skillfully, compassionately, imaginatively engage these energies and express them in ways that are more life-enhancing rather than destructive. So it's that combination of the archetypes' multivalence and human that gives room for human agency, for human freedom to have a purchase in the equation of our unfolding. And it's that kind of it's a kind of conjunctio oppositorum between free will and determinism. Both are at work very potently, and it's a constant tightrope walk.
Thank you.
It's a brilliant response, Rick. You know, I think the question really is at the root of a lot of the conflict we've had in the past 100 years and more. And history and literature are replete with stories about this question, about the interaction between humans and the gods and deities. I don't mean gods as masculine, but between humans and deities. And I also want to acknowledge one of the people on the group, Dr. Rosalie Rothman, in terms of mythology. She made this brilliant comment many years ago, one of our programs. She said, mythology is a telling of the human interactions with the gods. I mean, I love that. It's a history of our interactions, of humanity's interaction with the gods. And, you know, look, a lot of our stories, whether the movies Clash of the Titans or many of the stories, are really ways of trying to appropriate to the individual the functioning of the deities. You know, we don't need them, they're gods no more, we're more powerful. And it's interesting also that the history of religion in many ways has followed the history of science. Or history of science, I should say, has followed history of religion. In that when you have a causally driven Newtonian science, everything is all predicted. It's all predictable. You know, the classic, the billiard balls, one hits this hits that, and then you have a chain reaction, and you're going to end up, you begin at point A, you end at point Z. It's all predictable. And, you know, with religion, you had everything was somewhat preordained by these animistic forces. The gods wanted you to do it, deities wanted you to do it, the goddess wanted you to do it, and there wasn't a lot of free will. And the pendulum, as often happens with any huge paradigmatic shift, it goes 180. So when the scientific revolution began and moving into the world of the quantum, all the ideas of structured phenomena and all the ideas of predictability were usurped by what they call stochasticity. Stochasticity is a combination of ordered and random processes. So it's no longer just a point. It's no longer just order. It's no longer just predictable. There are other things that come in that create disorder. You know, from the idea of Maxwell's demons, with strange things happen when it should be all predictable. And then if you look at religion, when everyone said, well, what God wants, what goddesses want, what your life is going to be, and then more and more people began to grow fiercely independent of both. Science became fiercely independent of the mechanistic predictive theories, and so did many people with religion. Anyway, where it's led us to, and this is the piece I'm really quite passionate about. It led us to a belief, and again, you said it beautifully, Rick, and I'm not trying to buddy you up. I really respect you very much. That's why I say this. And I respect your scholarship and your working. I know you dedicated your life to this stuff. That we now believe, like Arachne, who is the goddess? Was it Arachne? Whoever said to the goddess, I'm a better spinner than you. I could spin better, okay? That's who we are. And so one of the ways that we express this sense of, we don't need them, they're gods. We don't need the architects are not going to structure our life, is we believe that, you know what? There really aren't any structuring forces. One of the greatest pieces, actually, Jung began his movement towards the integration of the sciences back in the 1940s with the whole concept of the psychoidal. Okay, with the psychoidal, he knew he understood he had to move into the sciences of the beginning of quantum, which began around the 40s, to Adolf Portman's work, which I'm going to be lecturing about extensively in Eranos. The zoologist that was a longtime leader and contributor at Eranos. So they brought it in to say, look, you know, we can create all the imaginings we want to, that we're the master of our universe. I mean, how many workshops do we see today? Change your pattern, change your this. Change your childhood history, change your memory. Oh, come on, give me a break. You know, we can have a relationship to those things, but there are still formative aspects, and even the traumatic things can shape us. You know, it was Elie Wiesel that said it's what we do with the trauma that shapes our life. I mean, of course, the trauma shaped, but then also what is our task? So anyway, a long story short, for my part of this response, is I think the growing trend in subjectivism, narrative therapies, relative truth, fake news. Look, I don't know. You spent a lot of time in Europe, Rick. I remember I was invited. I don't want to say which country. I was invited to give a series of lectures. And they said, could you tell me? They said, you want to know why you're invited? I said, it'd be nice to know. Why'd you invite me? They said, because especially here in this country, this particular country, the entire almost Jungian field has moved away from the idea of archetypes to a socially constructed and cultural unconscious. It's all social and all cultural. I said, are you saying what I think you're saying? I said, yeah, that the idea of a structuring capability. And one of the things I've been working on for all these years with the sciences and archetypes and therapy is building on Jung's piece that there's a structuring capability to archetypes. When you mentioned about countries, Rick, I mean, I think we have so much proof. And just look at history. History has been shaped by these archetypal forces that have taken over people. And I think it's the arrogance of the human condition that wants to believe, you know, get a little wand, we do a little whatever, do a little dance, and we're going to change the pattern. As my mentor said, and I got this secondhand, I didn't get it directly from him, but apparently he said at one point, you could be the most dedicated person in the world to your inner life. You could do your therapy 4 times a week, your meditation, writing your dreams down, and all the things one does. He said, if there's not grace there, it may not take. Right. I mean, do you realize the profundity? It's not you, but when we realize the profundity that it brings us to our knees with an attitude of humility and a sense of disdain when we keep on hearing, just change it, man, change it. Well, you know what? You take the iron filings on the table and tell them not to respond to the magnet. You're not going to do it. There are these archetypal magnetic forces. It doesn't mean we're pawns. But when you look at history, like Rick said here, when you look at how so many nations have been taken over by these archetypal tendencies, and your work, Rick, in terms of the astrological configurations that seem to take over an individual and a culture's life, a nation's life, you have to see it, and you have to realize, my God, individuality is built out of the nesting of the archetypal that comes. And yes, we need to emancipate and have relationship to it. But if you follow the developmental journey that we have, We come from the archetypal, we come from the oceanic state, we come from an undifferentiated state to develop the heroic and the individual. And you know what? Because we're so afraid of being swept back into that, we become the masters of the universe. I create the news, I create the truth, I make changes when I want to make changes. And you know what? Capo de capo. I'm the boss of the boss in my own psyche. Well, you know what? Get on your knees, man, and pray, because we're not. And obviously, and I feel that. So that question, I think, Rick, we can all, everybody in attendance here could go on this thing for hours, because it's such it's a profound question with profound individual and global implications.
Well, Michael, thank you. And you've answered not only that question, but the second question, which was going to be directed to you. So, which was, what is the structuring capability of the archetype in the self? And I think that you just eloquently and passionately spoke to that in your response to this question, bringing together the question that Rick was addressing initially, which is, great philosophical question, really, a question of life. Are we masters of our fate? Do we control our destiny? Rick, I loved a phrase that you brought up when you talked about the multivalent possibilities of the archetypal. Because, and Michael, what you were talking about as well worked right into that, because I think what you both are speaking to is, and again, the quantum plays into that as well, in understanding reality as fluid, at the same time that you understand that there is objective reality, and yet our relationship and our connection to that, understanding that there is something bigger than us that is structuring our reality, but also understanding that within that framework, within that structuring capability, there is creative room for the creative to form and shape our lives moving forward in a generative way. And again, I think that this is where the arts comes into this. This is where the creative has to come into this, especially when we're talking about trauma and the complexes that are created as a result of traumatic wounds that are made. So this idea of the multivalent possibilities, and Michael, the passion that you bring to this about the recognition and the awareness that we are not just putting the coin in the vending machine and choosing the archetype we want to put on for that day. It doesn't work like that. Someone asked this question, and I think you both have spoken to this, and we're going to close with this next question. But I think what you both are speaking.
Rick, I just have 1 second. Just read one quote of this person I mentioned, Adolf Portman, who hits this so artistically and beautifully. The structuring piece is very quick. It's good. He's talking about birds. I mean, this is an article called Metamorphosis in Animals. And again, Portman was a zoologist who was very influential in the Eranos programs from the 1940s on. And he writes, the feathering in birds is not only the outward manifestation that changes with the inner state. In birds, the song, the call also becomes a means of communication, no less varied than the change of dress, and give an eloquent expression not only to momentary changes of mood, but also to the great rhythms of life. We have all noticed how the sound of the wood changes with the seasons. Even though no birds may be in sight, how lively the forest is in May, in the spring, when even the invisible inhabitants bear witness to their life in songs and calls, and how different in late summer. How strange the silence, reflecting the metamorphosis of a hidden songbird. Song is essence. In it, the bird discloses its life, following the moods of the moment far from closely than it is possible in the more constant medium of dress. This is what those early Jungians cared about, looking at these natural tendencies of life to see there's something orienting it. And I'm kind of beating the drum here, I'm sorry. But I find his work because he's got the eye of a scientist and the heart of an artist and poet. It's so beautiful, again, around these structuring natural rhythms of life and tendencies. And it's been our hubris from the beginning of time that we're going to change it all. Sorry, I love that. I love the Portland.
That's a beautiful quote, Michael. Yeah, Adolf Portman.
Metamorphosis in Animals is a reference. Yeah.
Beautiful, bringing in the poetry and the science, the artistic and the scientific, which, Muriel's commenting here as well with a beautiful quote from William Blake: the dark religions are departed and sweet science reigns. So talking about bringing together, again, coming together, this moving away from this dualistic consciousness that says it has to be either or, but understanding that both are needed. And I think both of your work speaks to that, and also speaks to what we're really dancing around with each of you in this question is how do we transform? How do we put ourselves in that place where transformational, deep transformational work is able to be created and catalyzed? And I think you both are speaking to it in a similar way, with this recognition that it is something greater than us at work, an archetypal reality which is greater than us, a multivalent possibility. And I think, you know, we are, and we're going to be moving into, I'm looking at the clock here, into a couple of our last questions, but I want to ask this question. This is kind of off script for both of you. So, but I want to just put this out here is, do you, and I'd like to hear both your answers to this, think that we are in a period right now of a collective collision of consciousness where what is emerging is a new revelation of archetypal realities? And I'm sure you both are going to respond differently, but I'd love to hear both of your responses. So Rick, if you'd like to start with that, and then we'll hand it over to Michael.
Yeah, I deeply think that. I think what makes, for me, the most sense about this tremendous threshold that we are at as a civilization, as a species, as a planetary Earth community, it's a threshold of transformation that is very much like an initiatory threshold. It's very much like certain points in the individuation process or in the death rebirth ritual process of shamanic and ancient mystery religions and rites of passage, where one has to go through a surrender of the old identity, a surrender of the old sense of what reality is. And that's very hard because we're identified with our structures of reality and with our the particular identities that we have inherited, felt safe within, and those aren't enough now. There's a challenge on every level, right to the level of the human being's relationship to the rest of the Earth community, to other species, because everything that we've been talking about in terms of how much can my ego be the captain of my fate, my soul, etc. That's also how the modern human being and its industrial, technologically empowered civilization has been acting towards the rest of the Earth. And the Earth, which could be seen as in a certain sense as our great unconscious, is erupting, is letting us know something is amiss. And a great transformation is upon us. It's going to happen whether we will our participation or not. But I think what would most help in terms of, and this is getting to your question, Laura Lee, about how do we help a transformation like this happen? We need to set up, we need sacred space within which a profound transformation can take place. And there's a number of, there's not just one way this can happen. It can happen in a wilderness vision quest. It can happen in a holotropic breathwork session. It can happen in a Jungian therapeutic dyad in the consulting room. It can happen in the intimate crucible of every relationship that we are in, particularly the most important relationships with our spouses, our partners, our children, our parents, our closest friends and colleagues. whatever we work out there, we're also working out with our own unconscious, and in turn that can help us, and particularly looking at men's relationship to women, that's going to play a huge role, not only in moving towards a much better society, but moving to a much better individual psyche for each person, when that kind of solar, lunar, and masculine, feminine inner marriage can take place. But in addition to our relationship to the rest of the earth, which is, we've kind of been the solar hero in relationship to like conquering nature or something, that kind of conquistador mentality that obviously we've been shown is not going to be the modus operandi of success for the future. And so I think by carefully bringing ourselves into ritual settings and into the processes of creative self-exploration, and also within the crucibles of our own intimate relationships. Each of those are arenas within which this great kind of drama, this moral drama, this psycho-spiritual moral drama can unfold in a way that will have very concrete social, political, ecological, economic consequences, which our world dearly needs. So that's a short answer.
A big question. Thank you, Rick. Michael.
Well, I remember the moment when Obama was running and he had a debate with Romney. His name, right? I think Romney, whatever.
Mitt Romney.
And they were on the stage and going after each other. And it felt like two roosters with the feathers up, kind of going around each other. And I thought, what a pathetic show of masculinity. It was just pathetic. And I remember at that moment thinking, man, this is an embarrassment for all of us men. And probably a pretty horrible thing for you women to watch. And at that moment, that's when I said, you know what? I think we've gone, collectively now I'm speaking, we have gone as far as we can with this particular evolution or development of the masculine. We hit a brick wall. We hit a dead end. And I remember, Sky, you're up in Seattle area. I remember I was giving lectures in Seattle for the first time, maybe 5 years ago, 8 years ago, whatever that happened. I said, you know what? The next development has got to come by way of the feminine. I remember saying it publicly for the first time, and I was not trying to win fans with that one, But I felt so embarrassed and disgusted by watching that show of these two roosters up there. And I said, man, look where we are. So in terms of number one, are we on the verge of a new piece? Yeah. And I think all the work you're doing, Seeing Red, Muriel's doing wonderful work with that. Dr. Bonnie Dameron, who's on there, doing the wonderful work on the archetype of Penelope. There's a lot of phenomenal work being done right now about the feminine. Now, is it new? Now, it's interesting. If you go into the sciences, into systems theory and chaos theory, they talk about what are the preconditions for change. It's something I've been steeped in for a long time. The preconditions for change is described by Stephen Jay Gould. He was also a zoologist. He said you have what's called punctuated equilibria. Punctuated equilibrium means equilibrium. You're always at 70 degrees for this particular animal, 70 to 75. All of a sudden, it goes up to 85, it drops down to 50. Something new happens. Okay? Punctuated equilibrium by Stephen Jay Gould. All the chaos theorists would tell you need what they call a high-level perturbation to the system. That the point of stability has got to shift dramatically. So when that stable attractor shifts, you have the ushering of a whole new tract and a whole new regime. That's where we are right now. And it was Fred Abraham that gave me that language. He's really one of the fathers of chaos theory and psychology, a wonderful man. And he said, moments of instability are really referring to when there is the ousting of an old attractor site or a particular archetypal constellation to the ushering in of a new one. And the instability is because we're not secure. It's like maybe I can't imagine riding a surfboard or skiing for the first time or a bike. You kind of so unstable because you don't have your ground. You don't know how to do it. We don't know how to run this one yet. And I'm personally really glad that so many women are stepping up here and taking a stand. I mean, I'm trying to understand, why has this gone on for so many years of suppression? So the question, what do you need? I think Rick's answer is beautiful. You need some temenos. You need some kind of sacred temenos to do this in, whether in yourself. Rick, you mentioned many different kinds, and I agree with you. Whether therapy, whether meditation, something. And look, I admit my own world. I'm a stubborn person. I don't like these changes as I get older. But you know what? With the love of a woman next to me, and the psyche keep on knocking on my door every single day, something's beginning to take, and you hear it. So there's got to be some receptivity. And for many reasons, I think, well, there are a lot of ways to understand what creates conditions. I found, looking at the sciences, it helped a hell of a lot in terms of the punctual equilibria piece I mentioned, the ushering of new attractor sites, instability points. It's phenomenal to understand. And we see it. And how do you create it? There's got to, I think the ultimate piece, I'll shut up here, is there's got to be some attitude where we do literally shut up and stop listening to our own noise, and just shut up a little bit and say, what's knocking on my door? What is it? What do you want? Oh, right. This is coming into my life. Right. I am at this transition point. I don't want to accept it, but you know what? It's time to accept it. And you suddenly become more and more receptive to what's knocking on the door. So it's got to be a lessening. If I spoke French, I would use the expression, what is it? Lowering of consciousness, to allow it, which is what every spiritual ritual and healing tradition has, a lowering of the conscious mind. Abaissement du, whoever speaks French, you know what I'm saying. But I think that's what creates a condition, Marley. And the other thing is, there's got to be a hunger when you realize, like in therapy, what is the therapy that really creates conditions for change? When you have pain, when you say, I can't go on like this anymore. I don't want to live. I don't want to miss a shot at having love in my life. I don't want to miss a shot at, I don't want to miss the chance of having this gift that's inside of me to bring into the world. Something. That's my response to your question.
Well, thank you, Michael and Rick. I mean, these are, as I'm sure everyone who's on tonight realizes, these are profound questions, and for both of you to be giving the kind of answers and responses you are in the time that we have is no small task. So I want to say thank you to both of you. I do want to allow some time here to open it up to everyone. We've got about 10 minutes remaining tonight, so this has been, and I think it's wonderful that we're ending on this note with this question of sitting with transformation, the possibility of transformation, the change in consciousness that we are all living in these times that can be tumultuous. I mean, listening to both of you, resistance and death are both parts of transformation. The resistance to it and the conditions becoming so bad in order for us to be willing to go there, and then to recognize that something has to die for something new to come in, and to face the terror of that death. Those are all archetypal patterns that both of you and your work deals with and works with. And relative to the feminine, I'm not even going to go there, because I will start talking, and I'm not going to this evening. That's not what this is about. But yeah, I think we are seeing a profound emergence of a multi-nuanced archetypal realities that have not been able to be seen before for a number of reasons. And I think that we're seeing them emerge in the arts artistically, and I think we're also seeing them now emerging into the collective consciousness. And it's causing that, along with all this causing such a great upheaval that we all are in. And if we can root to these archetypal realities that, Michael, your work has been about, that Rick has been about, if we can bring this kind of depth and understanding to it, I think that these conversations are needed today more than ever before. And so I want to thank you both for what I think has been an amazing conversation, to be continued. So if you are on live this evening, if you're listening to this recording, please know that these conversations will be happening to a much deeper level, and you'll be able to hear the scholarship, the life scholarship and work of both Michael Conforti and Rick Tarnas at Eranos this July. And let me pull up, because I want to make sure I'm giving you the actual dates. It's July 22nd through the 27th in Eranos. We will have detailed information. Tony Danka is working hard, and we hope to be having all the details for all of you no later than the beginning of February. So please watch the Assisi website. Make sure you're on our email list. We'll be putting out more information about this, so that, because it's very limited in terms of attendance at Eranos, that most of you are familiar with that venue. It's very limited seating, and then once we open it up for registrations, it will be a kind of a first come, first served scenario. So again, the beginning of February, we will have the full detail with the schedule, the topics, prices, travel, all of that at the beginning of February. But for right now, we have not quite 10 minutes left. And I would like to open this up for anyone who'd like to ask a question. Now, there are close to 100 of you online with us this evening. So when I open this up, I'm not really sure how this will work, but we'll open it up. We'll unmute all of you and to share a question or
Laurely, one possibility with so many people, if everybody gets unmuted at once, it could be very loud.
Yeah.
You could also just have people type out a quick question in the chat. I don't know if that's
a wonderful suggestion. Yeah, if you want to use the chat bar to type a question, just go down to the bottom of your computer screen and you'll see that little icon chat. Click on that and it'll allow you to type in, and we can take the questions from there.
Laurely, one thing I wanted to just give as a kind of relevant example, we just had the Women's March yesterday across the world, and of course this is part of this whole last 50 years has been a ever more magnified empowerment of women and a transformation in the image of the feminine and so forth. And I thought, as in terms of seeing the signs of the archetype in the arts, in the collective, you know how films and increasingly streaming television series programs carry they're kind of like a window into the collective psyche's archetypal energies. And there's been two major series that many people have been watching. One's called The Crown on Netflix, and another one coming from England and Masterpiece Theatre is called Victoria. And they're about two queens, one in the 19th century and one in the 20th century. And they're both, it's like in both cases, they're young women basically taking on powerful patriarchal institutions and finding self-possession within those their time, and then navigating their way through it. And of course, that's why we're drawn to those stories right now. And particularly, there was an email that went out to everybody on who subscribes to Netflix, or maybe it was some other. It was coming from Masterpiece Theatre, and it was I think about Victoria, and it said, "A woman's place is on the throne," and I thought, boy, that captures the return of the queen. In terms of the king, queen, the solar, lunar, conjunctio, the sacred marriage, the hieros gamos, that is striving and struggling to be born in our time. Just thought I'd point out how something in popular culture right now, and of course there's so many other films that are carrying this empowered, the heroine, Hunger Games and Wonder Woman and so forth. So it's very much in the collective field.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. I really appreciate that. There is so much on Netflix. We're seeing a multi-nuanced emerging feminine archetypal identities, and they're coming into collective consciousness. You know they are when you see them emerging in the film. I mean, The Amazing Mrs. Maisel is another one on Netflix. Godless is another one on Netflix. The Dressmaker is another one. I mean, you're going to start seeing more and more of these, because I think that this archetypal reality is moving into a collective consciousness, because it's carrying, as Mary Beard is advocating in her book, Women in Power, it's bringing into fruition and bringing into consciousness hopefully a new definition of power that is not the conqueror that you were talking about earlier, this domination, but that is based and rooted more in empathic relationship, and which is more sustainable, and what both our globe, our earth, and we ourselves are crying out for. So yeah, thank you.
Lori, maybe we could spend a few extra minutes, because there are a lot of questions, and then
here's one from Barbara Taylor that I could read, and maybe you might start, Michael, with this. Would you please say more about creating the personal climate to becoming increasingly prone to accidents of grace on the path of personal inquiry and spiritual transformation? Say something about creating the personal climate to become increasingly prone to accidents of grace.
Do you want to begin, Rick? Or you want
No, well, since you brought up the important, I mean, I'm totally with you in the crucial importance of grace. When
Dr. Kaufman, excuse my voice, hold on a second. When Dr. Kaufman mentioned grace, the way again, I got a second hand, but I knew him pretty well. He was talking about it was something you can't control. You know, you don't, as Laurie said, put the money in the meat or whatever. I think for him, it was a deep hope and sort of a sense of prayer that you say, God, you know, what's that saying? What's the serenity prayer? You know, God grant me whatever, let the things I can't control and all that. Let me have a good life. And I think what he's getting at with the sense of grace is that maybe when you realize you can't control, and I think you were talking about that before in Laura Lee, that we can't control the appearance or immersion of grace into our lives. That's a pretty powerful thing. I mean, part of, I think, there's a lot of beauty in the New Age. I think a lot of the shadow of the New Age, really, it's a backhanded form of a lot of mechanistic stuff by saying we're going to make it happen. I mean, look, I think it's wonderful to try everything we can, from the meditation again to a lot of therapy. But somewhere there comes a moment. I mean, I'll give you the analogy now. I'll be quiet. I think of my father. My father's going on 102 years old, Rick. An old, stubborn Italian guy. And he's in rehabilitation right now, and he's had some trouble. He's been living independently, cooks for half the neighborhood, right? Anyway, with this last bout, he had double pneumonia, and he didn't know whether he was going to live or die. There's something profound about being at, you mentioned threshold before, that word, it's a great one. Being at that threshold moment, not knowing what's going to happen, that seems to be the piece. When you go into that hungry and hoping and not knowing what's going to happen, I hope to God that marriage is going to work. I hope to God my son or daughter grows up well. I hope I can help this client when they come to me. I hope this home will grant us the stuff for a good life. I don't know if it's going to do it. I'll do everything I can. Make money for the mortgage, and we decorate and do all the things we can to make a beautiful home, invest myself, you know. But you don't know what it's going to take. There's something beautiful about that attitude. I think that's the spirit within which Kaufman was coming from when he mentioned about grace, that we don't know. And when you give up on that, and some give up as in, I'm going to try to make it happen. So that's how I would respond to that. While you still do everything possible. You learn, like when you go fishing, the classic line with the fishing boats is they call it fishing, not catching, because you're never going to get anything. But the captains who really know the terrain, they know the waters, they know where to go and all that stuff. They say, I hope the fish are going to be here today. I'm reading all the patterns. There's bait fish here, there's structure, whatever. And we hope there's still going to be fish. And then I hope they're biting if they're here. So there's something about the beauty of that I love. And I think, you know, when Jung talks about the Negredo, the night sea journey, the dark night of the soul, with all that, it's a sense of, I don't know what the hell's going to happen. When something brings you to your knees, I think that's a moment that grace can enter, because you're not even asking for it necessarily.
Yeah. I think all of the ritual contexts and activities that we can place ourselves into for the possibility of transformation, they are all domains within which grace can suddenly emerge. Yeah. And grace emerges generally when you don't expect it. In fact, when you least expect it, which is when something's dying, when you've been defeated. There's usually some element of loss, of failure, of not having control of the situation. Deep healing takes place when you're not in control. When something, basically when the divine acts within you, and we can set up structures within which that is more likely to take place. And one of those structures is opening ourselves to artistic creativity, opening ourselves to the vulnerability of our depths when we are in therapy, or when we are participating in a sacred medicine ritual in Peru, in an ayahuasca circle. You kind of are placing yourselves before the Creator, and let what happens, whatever is going to happen. But there has to be some kind of an ego sacrifice in order for this deeper self to emerge, and it can't be calculated. It can't be simply earned. It's more of a love relationship in some sense.
Yeah,
that's kind of the paradigm of it.
Yeah, thank you, Rick and Michael, both profound conversations. I just want to take a couple more minutes and look. Hi, we want to shout out to Port Townsend Friends of Jung, who are here all together watching, gathered in a living room. So thank you for.
Oh, I know you. Hi.
Phones together. They're all here and watching. Hi.
Hi, Walleen. Hi, everybody. Thank you. I love you guys.
Some incredible questions from Dennis Kelly, and opening more to. Okay, we're not going to. Dennis, I will put this question on the board and maybe we can speak to it in Eranos, but in opening more to archetypes, how might we be limited by one, anthropomorphism, thinking it's all about us, and two, a linear forward-oriented addiction to time, moving forward as the focus instead of a cyclical view? Great questions, Dennis.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, we should, that'll be well worth addressing. There's something about the kind of the solar hero that can, in empowering the human, can become narcissistically egocentric, and in that sense anthropocentric and anthropomorphic. But there's also that kind of linear drive, and to bring in some combination of the cyclical and the linear unfolding, which is of course the spiral, the great spiralic mandala in a sense of life. That seems to be a way in which those two ways of understanding time can be reconciled. But anyway, yeah, these are very important questions, and I think Dennis's point we can really explore in greater depth at Eranos.
Yeah.
Let me say something about Eranos for those of you who are thinking of going there. There's I've been fortunate to lecture there a number of times, and it's a magical place. It's a place where Jung and many of the leading thinkers within not only depth psychology and the archetypal perspective, but really kind of the broader realm of the humanities and sciences have met there since the 1930s. And it's a villa that's right on Lago Maggiore, the lake that's on the borderline of Switzerland and Italy. And you can feel when you're there, you definitely feel the presence of Jung and Karenyi and Neumann and von Franz and Olga Frobe, who was the woman who founded Eranos and then guided it with Jung for so many years. So it's a very special place, and when one is there, you can you're kind of participating in that morphic field of evolving wisdom. There's only 40 places that you can, only 40 people that we can fit in there at any one time. So I'm imagining we may do this more than 1 year, but it is a limited venue, but that's part of its magic and intimacy, I guess, is that. But anyway, obviously, many of you who are listening to us tonight are not going to be there. And so I'm glad that we've had this time together to give some of the, to share some of the kinds of ideas that and insights that we hope to explore there as well.
Can I recommend an article, Rick? I'm sure you know this, by Rudolf Ritzema, one of the directors of Eranos for many years. So all of you, I recommend it. It's a really a wonderful piece, and it's called The Origins and Opus of Eranos, Reflections at the 55th Conference. I'll say it again. It's by Ritzema, R-I-T-S-E-M-A, Rudolf Ritzema, The Origins and Opus of Eranos. And if you look at the Eranos yearbooks, I don't remember, unfortunately, which year it was in. Which yearbook? Well, the 55th. Okay. So.
Be about 1988 then, I suppose.
Okay, 1988. Or if you go online and just check out Ritzema's publication, it's really a beautiful, beautiful piece of writing that captures the spirit of what we're trying to capture here. And it's a short piece, maybe 8 pages, and absolutely brilliant. Just wonderful, wonderful piece. Also, I think Laura Lee and Tony had a great idea that if people are interested, maybe just to compile some kind of mailing list right now, people that are seriously interested, that we could send information to. Tony, if you're there, so maybe you want to talk to Laura Lee. Do you know about that?
No, yeah. So at this point, what I would recommend, and thank you, Michael and Rick, for a phenomenal conversation, deep conversation, to be continued at Eranos. I would say if you're interested and you think there's any possibility you'd like to join us in July at Eranos, send an email, a cc@together.net. Just email us. We'll make sure that you are on the official email list for Eranos. And as soon as we have all of the details, Tony's working on a beautiful brochure. We will make sure that you're one of the first people to get that. So just email us at cc@together.net. And we will make sure you are on the list to get all of the details and all of the information to join us. And I'd like to close tonight, if I may, with sharing this, because it's kind of where this conversation went. We started with kind of the origins of this work and the beginnings of your life, Michael and Rick, and what drew you to it, and ended in the waters of transformation. And so I thought I'd go back. I pulled another Heschel book off of my shelf tonight. I thought I would leave all of you with this tonight. Talking about transformation and this archetypal, the work of both Michael and Rick speaks to, I think, individuals who have given their lives and their gifts and their talent into not only doing the work, but living this life. And it shows in the scholarship, I think, that's going to be shared of both psyche and soul, because transformation doesn't happen only in the world of logos. So the psyche and soul that is going to be there at Eranos is in just a beautiful, incredible setting. But I want to close this evening by sharing the words of Abraham Heschel with all of you. He says this: "To become aware of the ineffable is to part company with words. The essence, the tangent to the curve of human experience lies beyond the limits of language. The world of things we perceive is but a veil. Its flutter is music, its ornament science, but what it conceals is inscrutable. No words can carry it away. Sometimes we wish the world could cry and tell us about that which made it pregnant with fear-filling grandeur. Sometimes we wish our own heart would speak of that which made it heavy with wonder." So if we can leave you this evening with the encouragement of bringing that sense of awe and wonder and putting yourselves in those places, in those relationships, and in those places where awe and wonder are a part. I think that you'll see as a transformation. Thank you all.
Lori,
Thank you again.
thanks for beautiful navigation to what you did for us tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Laura.
You're welcome. Thank you to both of you and to Tony and to all of you who are on this evening. We will have a recording of this and we will post it and let you know when it's posted. So thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.